Good afternoon to you, my viewers. Thank you for coming back to watch yet another episode here on my YouTube channel. This is episode 49 of my YouTube channel, which I launched this past June of the year 2020. Today, in this episode, I'm going to continue recounting the events during the time that I was an employee of Vinfen Corporation. You can look back to a previous episode to learn more about Vinfen, as well as go to their website, vinfen.org, to learn more. That's spelled VINFEN.org. In this episode, I'm picking up where I left off. In episode 48, I discussed my employment history and some of the seminal events of my time from July and August of 2019 working for the company on Cape Cod. So in this episode, I'm going to continue to describe those events. I left off in mid-August of 2019. By that point, I had been suspended from my employment with the company for nearly a month by mid-August. I was having significant symptoms of distress due to the stress of having no reliable income, and I was increasingly feeling unwell and was increasingly frustrated with the amount of time it took for the investigations being performed to be resolved. So, on Sunday, August 18th, I had a dream that led me to believe that my history of having post-traumatic stress disorder was in fact very much activated again. Specifically, I had a dream. I would call the dream a flashback because the dream content featured information from a flashback to an earlier portion of my life. Specifically, I had a dream that I was still working with my former supervisor of the museum that I had worked at in Tacoma, Washington. In that dream, in that flashback, my supervisor was being abusive in public, and in the dream, she corrected me for a mistake in a rather harsh way. I walked away from whatever work activity I was engaged in and decided I needed to make another complaint against her and quit my position. I can still remember in the dream thinking I cannot do this for another 6 months. So basically, by that point in August, I was so stressed that I was actually having flashbacks or dreams featuring a previous bad work experience that I'd had in 2017. On Tuesday, August 20th, I was faced with the additional challenge of not having some of the support that I customarily had. So I'm going to back up a bit here now and talk about how I was getting some support during the time that I was living in the state of Massachusetts when I first moved to the state. So in February of 2019, not long after I had moved to the state of Massachusetts, I began doing therapy with a psychotherapist based in Hyannis. It's important to note that I undertook this therapy with no significant encouragement from anyone. I did this therapy with no encouragement from my family, from my parents, from my brother, from any significant friends. I did this because I wanted to basically be performing maintenance of my health. Sometimes people go to therapy because they are in a crisis and they are in such an emergent situation that they need help right then in that very moment to prevent more catastrophic consequences to whatever they're going through. And sometimes people need therapy to recover from a recent ordeal. And then sometimes people go to therapy because they simply want the companionship of a therapist to help them process their world and their life experiences in a way such that they can maintain and improve their health. So, I elected to go to therapy starting in February of 2019. The therapist that I had been working with for about 6 months by that point went on a summer vacation, as is common for most any professionals to do. So I had a person take his place to provide me some support while my therapist was away. Now, by late August, I had been suspended from my employment for an entire month. I was very distressed. I was having significant health symptoms. A reason that the investigations involving me took longer than they might have was the fact that Vinfen was adamant about having me appear in person to answer questions related to their investigations. This prospect made me uncomfortable, as all that had passed prior to this time had left me increasingly convinced that the company was unprofessional and gave little thought to the rights and comforts of its employees. I therefore requested the option to answer questions in written form so I would not have to appear in person. I was worried that those present might try to manipulate a certain response out of me that would later be used to further hurt me. So basically, by this point in August, I was in this kind of tug of war, as it were, with the company, because I felt like it would be very uncomfortable and possibly damaging to me to appear in person to answer their questions. And really what had broken my trust to a significant degree was the incident of August 6th, in which I received this phone call with no advance notice asking me to provide information about a complaint made by a group home resident. That was later decided in my favor that there was no credibility to the claim made. So that incident of August 6th really destroyed most of the trust that I had left in the company. So I was still willing to see these investigations through the end and see what might happen, but I was so uncomfortable with the way the company had conducted itself by then that I didn't want to go into a meeting in person by myself and have to answer questions in person. I wanted to do it in written form, and I thought that that was a reasonable request to make given my circumstances. So what happened was my therapist that was working with me at the time, who was working in place of my customary therapist, he wrote up a statement for me advocating that I be allowed to answer questions in written form. And I saved that document just as I've saved many, many documents so I could document what ultimately happened in case I needed to have this information for entities that I later became involved with, such as the Social Security Administration and the Massachusetts Department of Unemployment Assistance. So this therapist, acting in place of my customary therapist, wrote a statement advocating that I be able to answer questions in written form. But Vinfen did not relent, and they continued to insist that I come in person. On Wednesday, August 21st, I went to the emergency room at Cape Cod Hospital after having very distressing thoughts due to issues regarding the processing of my application for short-term disability. So what had happened was I had been without reliable income for a month because I was on an unpaid suspension from the company. I was rapidly losing what financial resources I had, and I was so distressed by it that I was becoming very angry with the many parties involved who were not able to help me, including my insurance company. I had applied for short-term disability to try to find some way to have some sort of an income while I was still waiting for these suspensions to be, for my suspension to be resolved. But I was not deemed eligible to receive short-term disability, and the eligibility issue was due to the particular circumstances of my work relationship with Vinfen, namely that I was still an employee, though I was suspended. So due to the lack of resources available to me, I was so distressed that I went up to the hospital. I went to the emergency room because I was that distressed, I was that angry, I was that scared. And things just continued to get more and more challenging as time went on. So I went to the emergency room because not being able to get short-term disability benefits basically left me without any hope of not ending up homeless on the streets. And I was horrified to end up homeless on the streets. So prior to going to the hospital on that day, I dropped off a one-page statement at the Hyannis office of Vinfen. In that statement, I made it clear I would cooperate with the company only insofar as I could balance such cooperation with my need to protect my own health. And that document that I left with them is also in my possession, obviously. On Thursday, August 22nd, I was admitted to an inpatient mental health care facility at Cape Cod Hospital. I remained there until I was discharged on the following Tuesday, August 27th. During that time, there was apparently no progress made in the resolution of the issues under consideration with Vinfen. So by this point in late August, I had become so distressed, so sick, that I was at an inpatient mental health care facility on Cape Cod, at Cape Cod Hospital, for 5 days. That's how bad things had become because I was not getting the kind of resources and support that I needed. That is what happened. It was that bad. And this was just the beginning of how bad it would become. During the time that I was hospitalized at Cape Cod Hospital, they came up with yet another diagnosis for me, which, is something they customarily, I think, have to do in relation to insurance billing. It said that I had acute stress disorder. Certainly sounds like the right sequence of words to describe what I was going through, because I was acutely distressed by the circumstances that I found myself in. On Wednesday, August 28th, I met with a physical therapist because I was having some other distressful muscle spasm problems. I then also had an appointment with my lawyer that day. On the 29th, Thursday, August 29th, I received contradictory information from Vinfen and Cigna regarding my eligibility for short-term disability. A representative for Cigna closed my application after informing me I was eligible to receive disability benefits due to the stress I was experiencing as a suspended unpaid employee. I had a bad headache that day, and I attribute that also to the immense stress I was going through at the time. The next day, Friday, August 30th, I spoke with my interim therapist regarding my circumstances. During one of our phone calls on this day, he informed me that the office manager had received a phone call from a representative of Cigna in which it was alleged that I was back in the hospital. That was not correct. I was not in the hospital. I was in upstate New York visiting a friend on that day. I also had a bad headache on that day. On this day, I also contacted a representative of Vinfen to begin the process of filing a workers' compensation claim against Vinfen. In my claim, I intended to state that Vinfen was deliberately retaliating against me as a way of causing me such distress that I would ultimately leave my job and seek employment elsewhere. Basically, what I was trying to do by the beginning of September was find some way to find a source of income to sustain myself so that I would not remain homeless, which I was homeless by the beginning of September of 2019. That was part of what motivated me to apply for short-term disability and file a workers' compensation claim. I was trying to find every legal option I had to minimize the risk of my circumstances becoming worse and worse and worse. But it didn't work. On Friday, September 6th, I finally met with several individuals of Vinfen to answer questions pertinent to the 2 investigations involving me. In this meeting, I learned that one issue under review was apparently a complaint about me making a supposedly aggressive gesture towards a night shift worker. This was the first time I had heard such a claim made against me. At no time did I ever speak to the person making this allegation against me about this supposed incident. None of my coworkers were referenced in this allegation either. In this discussion, I also shared a very important piece of information as to why I was very uncomfortable working with this night shift worker. As I have referenced in a recent video I've made here about my history with Vinfen, this night shift worker customarily came to work late. It was a habit. She was not reliable in terms of ever arriving on time at work in the evening. But there was another incident that happened with her that was very, very uncomfortable for me. This woman essentially asked me to commit fraud. There was an occasion where, on a morning when I arrived for a shift, she requested me to sign off on her timesheet, and in doing so, effectively represent that I knew for a fact that she had worked a certain shift that was noted on her time card. Now, I had not witnessed her work that shift. And because she was not a Vinfen employee, but was instead a third-party contractor, it was not really within my purview to know anything about her time card, nor to sign off on her time card. So when she asked me to sign off on her time card and to basically effectively testify that she had worked this particular shift, I refused. Because what she was asking me to do was to commit fraud. She was asking me effectively to lie by stating that I knew for a fact that she had worked a shift that I had not witnessed she had worked. This made me very uncomfortable because she was basically asking me to lie, and I don't believe in lying. I have been victimized in my life plenty by people who have lied to me or about me, and it's caused my life to be burdened many, many times. So I am very, very adamant about not lying. I despise lying. You can quote me on that. Whoever's watching that, I despise lying, and I despise when people do it. People who routinely do that, I want nothing to do with, because I know from an early age the power of what lying and dishonesty can do, how much it can destroy relationships, lives, communities, countries. I despise lying, and I really, really was very uncomfortable when she asked me to put my signature on her time card. So I shared this incident in that meeting to illustrate how uncomfortable I was with this woman who worked through a third-party contracting agency. After meeting with Vinfen staff on this day, I drove to Boston, where I was later admitted to Massachusetts General Hospital. I sought out yet another hospitalization because I was homeless and was also feeling quite ill. I had not been pleased with the health care I had received previously on Cape Cod. I was at Massachusetts General Hospital through the morning of Monday, September 9th. I was also not completely pleased with the care I received there. On the night of Saturday, September 7th, I was taken from my private room and put in the hallway at approximately 2:30 in the morning. I then had to endure some of the staff having conversations and laughing in the middle of the night when most people would prefer to be sleeping. I rehospitalized myself in September of last year because the stress of dealing with Vinfen had been gradually accumulating and was thus causing me a number of symptoms, including headaches, nightmares, anxiety, and depression. On Monday, September 9th, I was transferred from Massachusetts General Hospital to yet another hospital. I was transferred to Bournewood Hospital, located in Brookline, Massachusetts. This was my second inpatient hospitalization in less than 30 days, and I remained there until September 12th. During the period that I was hospitalized there, I attempted to get the necessary paperwork completed such that my workers' compensation claim could be processed in a timely way. Unfortunately, that did not happen either. On September 12th, I was discharged from Bournewood Hospital. I took the T to Massachusetts General Hospital, where I retrieved my car, and I subsequently paid my $84 parking bill. I thereafter left Massachusetts and drove to spend some time with a friend in the state of New York. During my drive to New York, a traveler's insurance agent contacted me to inform me that my workers' compensation claim had been denied due to lack of information necessary to perform a review. Of the 4 entities that could have provided medical documentation necessary to review the claim, not a single one provided information by the deadline. These 4 entities were my therapist's office, a community health center in Mashpee where I customarily received care, Massachusetts General Hospital, and Cape Cod Hospital. So I was doing everything in my power to protect myself, to protect my health, to find a way back from this abyss that I was now in because of this mess with having worked for Vinfen and being accused of these things that I did not do. And no matter how hard I worked, it seemed like I couldn't do enough of it by myself because I didn't have enough support to help me to get it done. I tried my best, and I still was getting worse and worse. On Tuesday, September 17th, I was finally notified that one investigation into an alleged human rights violation involving me was resolved in my favor, so I was relieved about that. On Friday, September 20th, I met with my primary care physician to have my annual physical. As of the date of my physical, I still had not been notified of the status of the second investigation involving me. I therefore asked my primary care physician to write a note advocating for a resolution of the investigation as soon as possible. It is important to note that this was not the first time that I had actually asked a healthcare provider to write a note on my behalf advocating for a speedy resolution to the concerns that had caused my suspension. Because every day that passed that I continued to wait was another day that I was suspended without pay and that I did not know exactly what I should do next. Now I'm going to back up here a moment and explain another aspect of this whole story, as this might be something that Vinfen Corporation will bring to the forefront if my decision to disclose and share all of this story leads to more public wrangling with this company. When I was suspended from the company, I did have the option to go take another job while I was suspended. My suspension did not have any terms requiring me to not accept other employment if I wanted to look for other employment while I was suspended from the company. So I did have that option. The reason I did not exercise that option was because initially, when I was first suspended, before things happened like the August 6th phone call and the fighting over how I would respond to their request for information, before these things happened, I still had some fairly large measure of confidence that this would all be resolved in a way that would lead me to feel the trust in that my trust in the company could be restored and that I could go back to being employed with them. So initially, I did not look for other work because I was under the impression that I would find my way back from this and I would have my trust restored and I would go back to work for them and everything would be fine. But as events continued to unfold, as they did, and I lost more and more trust in the company and in the ethics of its operations, I became increasingly distraught, which led to my symptoms, my own health issues worsening, which then led to what happened later, which were my hospitalizations and so on. So even though I had the option to go look for other employment, I did not initially do so because I wanted to give the company the benefit of the doubt that eventually things would be resolved in a suitable way. But that is not ultimately what happened. On Tuesday, September 24th, I met with another local doctor on Cape Cod. This day is also important to note because on this day I got involved with another healthcare provider who did not give me proper care. Meeting with this provider compromised my health. This was a psychiatrist that I met. I'm not going to share her name here. She misdiagnosed me. She thought I had She thought that I had. I'm forgetting as I'm speaking here. She thought I had something that she thought that I had bipolar disorder. She thought that I was bipolar. So she diagnosed me as such, and then she put me on entirely new medication that I'd never taken in my entire life. And it had very, very bad impacts. I became so drowsy and so low functioning from the meds that she put me on that for a series of days while I was still on them, I would wake up exhausted and be exhausted for the first 5 hours of the day. It was like being a zombie. It was like being in my body and feeling as if my limbs were almost beyond my ability to control them. I felt that tired and heavy and unable to function while I was on this medication. So that further compromised my circumstances and further aggravated what was already a very difficult situation. By this point, I had already been hospitalized more than once. I was very distraught. I had been homeless by that point for over a month, and I just wasn't getting any better. So in late September of 2019, Vinfen finally contacted me and informed me that the remaining investigation had been concluded in my favor. Based on the findings of that investigation, I was offered the opportunity to return to work for the company in a different role. Despite my misgivings about doing so, I believed it was best for me to take a suitable job at least for a short time while I looked for something more suitable outside of the company. It's important to note here that my lawyer also recommended the course of action that I took, namely that I accept the opportunity to go back to work for the company and that I work for them for a period of time, and meanwhile look for another job. And so that's what I did. In late September, the investigations were completed. I was allowed to go back to work, and I did. I took a role at a different site that Vinfen operates. It's not on Cape Cod, and I left Cape Cod. But I was still having trouble because of the misdiagnosis and the medications I had been put on by a psychiatrist I met with in late September. And I don't right now remember exactly what day it was that I finally went off those meds and was given different treatment. But that compromised my ability to function for several weeks, those medications that I was put on. So that is how September of 2019 ended. I decided to go back to the company. I was assigned to work a position in Quincy, Massachusetts. On October 8th of 2019, I met with this psychiatrist on Cape Cod a second time. I don't clearly recall what we discussed in that meeting. The medication she had placed me on had severely affected my daily functioning, as I've already noted. I was upset about this, as my life had already been very stressful for several months now, as I have already noted in great detail in these many videos that I've already recorded. I worked for Vinfen in this other role for the month of October. On November 1st, with fairly minimal notice, I terminated my employment with the company. November 1st of 2019 was the last day that I worked for Vinfen Corporation. Later in 2019, before the year ended, my lawyer filed with the Massachusetts Commission Against Discrimination. So I had a case against Vinfen Corporation brought before the Massachusetts Commission Against Discrimination. After terminating my employment with Vinfen Corporation, my circumstances did not improve for quite some time. I remained homeless. I was hospitalized repeatedly, and my health would not improve for months. And so this episode basically concludes the period of time in which I was working for Vinfen Corporation. But what's going to follow now is the sequence of events, that unfolded after I terminated my employment with Vinfen up until basically the present day. So I'm talking about a 13-month period of time now that I have yet to describe. And I will give you a brief synopsis of what's going to follow by saying that I did not get the kind of proper care that I needed to find until months after November 2019, months and months later. What happened between November of 2019 and April of this year, 2020, was one of the most painful periods of my life that I have ever gone through. And that is saying a lot, considering all of the things that I've experienced in my life, all of the horrors, all of the trauma, all of the people who failed me, all of the institutions that screwed up. That's saying a lot, that what I went through in those 5 months was some of the worst days, weeks, and months of my life. So in the next videos, you'll see me recount what happened next. I've decided to share all of what happened after November of 2019 because it is important for people who work in the healthcare industry to understand the consequences of a system that does not do enough to help the people that come to it looking for help. And the reasons our system in this country and in the state of Massachusetts more specifically, the reasons that these systems are not as functional as they could be are several. I have done a lot of research to better understand the challenges and failings of the American healthcare system. I have written about it, I have recorded content about it, and you're going to hear more about that in the coming episodes. So while I will not specifically focus on Vinfen, as the history of my time with that company has now come to an end in these videos, it's still going to be relevant to Vinfen because what happened to me in these last many months may never have happened, probably would never have happened, I think is almost certain would never have happened if I had never been a kind, generous, and caring person and decided to serve in the healthcare industry here in the state of Massachusetts. So I look forward to you continuing to watch my videos. thank you for taking an interest in these, and I look forward to sharing more with you soon.